the will of the gods or fate in ancient times meant that divination was a perfectly accepted way to determine the future in ancient Greece and Rome in particular. That's where I'm going to be looking today. Divination was one of the many gifts to mankind that was supposedly given by Prometheus. Speaking in the 1st century BC, Marcus Tullius Cicero, a famous Roman statesman, lawyer and orator, writer, he said, "I'm aware of no people, however refined and learned, or however savage and ignorant, who do not think that signs are given of future events, and that certain persons can recognise those signs and foretell events before they occur." The practice of fortune telling and prophecy, it's been going on for millennia, and it rests on the idea that there is a spiritual realm which affects us, or at the very least, it can foretell our life's journey and what will happen to us. And it's open to only a select number of people. It's accessible only to them. This practice persisted in some places for hundreds of years, which attests to its respect by the people who visited and were given advice, and that includes politicians and other high-ranking officials. It was a serious belief. It's not really a lot of difference between, you'll hear words like prophet or oracle or seer. Prophet's just one of the many terms that describe practitioners of prophecy. Other terms might be diviner or augur. And these terms are often used interchangeably. Attia, who wrote this book, distinguished between oracles and seers. He said that oracles were thought to be portals through which the gods spoke directly to people. In this sense, they were different from seers, or in the Greek manteas, who interpreted signs sent by the gods through bird signs, animal entrails, and other various methods. Cicero, he attempted to classify it as well. These are the different types of prophecy. Inspiration received through dreams, trances, and divine revelation, and the sibyls would have fallen into that category. And then there's practices based on observation and interpretation of natural signs. Walter Burkert is used quite a lot by classicists. He explains that any occurrence which is not entirely a matter of course, which cannot be manipulated, may become a sign. A sudden sneeze, a stumble, a twitch, a chance encounter, or the sound of a name caught in passing. Celestial phenomena such as lightning, comets, shooting stars, eclipses of sun and moon, even a drop of rain. So there were many kinds of divination. In ancient Rome, I mentioned the word augur, and that was believed that the flight of birds could predict the future. That was known as augury. Birds such as crows, vultures, and eagles in particular, and if they were flying to the left, that was a good sign. If they were flying to the right, it was a bad sign. Interestingly, Greece was the opposite way about it. And there were many rules, so fortune-telling ceremonies were presided over by special priests, or, as I mentioned, augurs. Numerology was also a keen hobby in ancient times. The ancient Greek philosopher Pythagoras here, and he believed that numbers could not explain the way things are, but the way things are going to be as well. He set up his own movement, and with his loyal followers, he attempted to find clues to the workings of the universe in numbers. I think I've got one quite there. Haruspice is a number of ancient civilizations where animals were killed and their entrails were examined as a means of predicting the future. Alexander the Great used this method. He would often consult his favourite seer, a Greek named Aristander, before going into battle. Ancient Etruscan seers were called haruspecs. The haruspecs examined the shape, size, and markings on the entrails to interpret the will of the gods and to predict future events. This is the Etruscan liver of Piacenza, and it's a model of a sheep's liver from Piacenza. For the ancient Etruscans, the liver was a tool of divine communication. And this bronze model here, it was used to teach future haruspices how to read God's signs. And these correspond to, for example, it might be the Olympians or something like that. The inner sections of the liver also has deeper segments over on this side, and they were interpreted as different divine influences on whatever the question was that was being asked. And these haruspices also interpreted all portents or unusual phenomena of nature, especially things like thunder and lightning, which I think we're supposed to get today, and unusual, or what the ancient people might have described very horribly as monstrous births. Haruspice was of great importance. Under the Roman Empire, there was a collegium of 60 haruspices, but it was never a state priesthood. It was a body of salaried experts or advisors, and they were still active up to the 5th century AD. So supernatural signs, that gives you an idea of how important and how seriously they thought these signs were. It even determined whether or not to go to war. Professional diviners, they were expected to be there, accompanying soldiers into battle. So that's how seriously it was taken. And on one occasion, the Greeks and the Persians encamped opposite each other for 10 days because the omens did not advise either side to attack. That was the Battle of Plataea in 479 BC. The Greeks, led by the Spartans, were waiting for favourable omens before charging, and that led to a 10-day period where the armies just did not engage. And then the Spartans charged, and they routed the Persians and killed their leader, Mardonius. Now we can also look at the biblical literature to give us an insight into people's beliefs and what was going on at that time. Biblical prophets are what you might call a precursor to the Sibylline prophetess of antiquity. So the Old Testament, among the people of Israel, there was an office of priest and an office of prophet. The priest spoke to God on behalf of the people, while the prophet spoke to the people on behalf of God and gave prophetic messages. And these messages given to the prophet communicated God's will and guided them back to a relationship with God. You'll know some of the more famous ones, I'm sure. There's Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. So there's Isaiah. He was an 8th century BC Israelite prophet. The book of Isaiah is named after him. The Gospel of John says that Isaiah saw Jesus' glory and spoke about him, as demonstrated in the songs of the suffering servant. There's Jeremiah, who experienced visions of hope and comforting returning exiles. Daniel, I'm quite sure you'll know, Daniel's the only one who can interpret the dreams of Nebuchadnezzar. And of course, we see him here in the lion's den, saved from Asiatic lions, because he was found blameless before them. And Ezekiel, he experienced visions of God, including the throne of God surrounded by angels. I would like to do quite an extensive study actually on Ezekiel, because I know that in the UFO community there is a belief that what Ezekiel saw was a UFO. That's not what I think Ezekiel saw. And that's disappointing, but I think it was more to do with noticing suddenly the stars and the stars' movement, and those movements were wheels within wheels. But I need to look more into that, so I'm not going to dwell on it just now. But the purpose of the prophets in the Bible is to warn people of the consequence of their sin and call people to return to God and be faithful to Him. The function is to expose simple practices like idolatry and child sacrifice, which was going on in some places. The sibyls were sacred oracles and healers. They were famous and they were revered through antiquity in the North African and Mediterranean world. The famous pre-Roman oracles of Delphi were known as Pythia, and it was these sibyls who announced the verdicts of the Greek god Apollo from about 800 BC and flourished up to about 550, 450 BC. They handled serpents, particularly pythons. The python is an important African mythological serpent. So, for example, the Igbo group of southeast Nigeria revere the python as a messenger of the gods. Similar variations prevail through Africa and ancient Egypt. The Egyptian goddess Isis, wearing the same python garland associated with important Igbo deities. The snake's capacity to shed its skin, magically regenerating, continuously moving, bridging life and death, with its ability to heal and cure people, made the python a supreme deity in African countries. Now, I looked up what snake and venom can actually do. So I found out that medicinally, snake saliva aids wound healing, and snake venom has anti-clotting properties. Protein copperhead snake venom has been used to help cure breast cancer, and also things like high blood pressure tablets and heart attack medication can be taken from snake venom. It's weird. We'll come to the snakes in a bit. So there's lots of really interesting research going on just now with things like that. But the python in Africa, if they found a dead python, it was buried like a human. And if there was an accidental death, it was buried like a human. So it's a greatly revered animal. This is Mama Zogbe. She works full-time as Chief Honan Amangazi in the Mama Wata Vodun Amangazi tradition. She maintains that the sibyls were present across the globe, and she wrote this book, The Sibyls, and she says in that the name derives from European Cushites as a title of sacred initiation and a term of endearment for Mami, known as Sibele, or Chibrele, or Kibrele. So something like that. They use various different terms for her. It loosely means Queen of Heaven or Mother of Gods. Mama Wata is a water goddess in the African religious tradition. She's often depicted with the tail of a fish or a snake, and frequently adorned with a python around her neck. The snake, the serpent, like the god Apollo, is linked to both the sun and divination. And the serpent's association is tied to the symbols of the symbolism of cycles like rebirth, the sun's journey through the heavens. In ancient mythology, the serpent or the cosmic serpent represented the cyclical nature of existence, including the sun's nightly journey and daily rebirth. And we see this in the Egyptian myth of Amduat, where a serpent symbolised the sun god Ra's nightly journey. Additionally, the serpent's ability to shed its skin and regenerate is understood to be a metaphor for the sun's constant renewal. Its association with divination stems from its symbolism of hidden knowledge, wisdom, and connection to the supernatural. In various cultures, snakes have been seen as intermediaries between the mortal and the spirit worlds, and as entities capable of accessing and revealing hidden truths and supernatural secrets. This is the mummy mask of a woman who displays bracelets in the form of snakes above both hands. The snake motifs on her bracelet suggest that she may have been a snake handler or a sibyl. The substantial evidence suggests that the concept of Mama Wata has its origins in the first encounters of Africans and Europeans in the 15th century. Her first representations were probably derived from European images of mermaids and marine sculptures like the one we see there. There was a growing global trade to and from Africa, and the Africans likely recognised their water goddess when they saw the depiction of these mermaids on the front of trader ships. Africans have venerated water spirits and deities for millennia. The name Mamiwata, that's Pidgin English. The language was developed to help communication between trader and buyer. So Mamawata is mother water. This is a red figure bell crater, and it shows the Delphic Pythia and illustrates that snakes were an important feature of her headdress, like the imagery of Mamawata. This is the tripod that she would have sat on here. Some people say that she sat on it, some people say that she leaned over it and inhaled the fumes. Other people say the fumes were coming from underneath, so there was a tripod over this fissure, this crack below. So there's still lots of research been done on that side of things. But she would breathe in the vapours, and then that would allow her to go into a frenzy. And I do think that they were probably adorned by snakes. But I also think that perhaps her hair was designed to look snake-like, because dreadlocks were a fashion in ancient Africa, India, and Greece. And when people would encounter other people that they've never met for the first time, they'll liken things to what they see. So it may be that the sibyls had a reputation for having snake-like hair.
And who do we know like that? Herodotus says the myth of Medusa is based on the religion of the Berbers of North Africa. So that could possibly tie in with the sibyls. But I'd need to do a lot more research on Medusa in order to discuss that.
So from the late 4th century, the number of sibyls increased rapidly, and they were particularly associated with Apollo. By the 4th century, the sibyls were distinguished by, and that's the 4th century BC, they were distinguished by individual names, but sibyl became a title. Dionysius of Halicarnassus said that there existed a notable collection of Sibylline prophecies called the Sibylline Books. Now, in the 6th century BC, this sibyl, possibly called Amalthea, because of her connection with the Chimaean sibyl, travelled with 9 books. and she offered these for sale to Tarquinius Superbus, also known as King Tarquin, the last of the 7 kings of Rome. So he refused to pay a price, so the sibyl burned 3 books and then offered him 6 for the same price. He refused, so she burned another 3. And eventually Tarquin relented and he bought the 3 remaining books at the price that she had originally asked for all 9. The 3 books were subsequently kept in the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill. They were guarded day and night. They were only to be consulted in emergencies or times of crisis. Other seers added to the collection over time, but sadly they were destroyed in a fire in 83 BC, and only a few fragments now remain. But the sibyls maintained many sacred sites. These ones that I'm going to show are by Michelangelo, and they're in the Sistine Chapel. They're painted in the Sistine Chapel. So the Persian sibyl, who is over there on this side, she is believed to be a prophetic priestess who presided over the Apollonian oracle, and she is said to have foretold the exploits of Alexander the Great. Then we've got the Libyan oracle here. She was a prophetic priestess who presided over the ancient Zeus Ammon oracle at the Siwa oasis in the western desert of Egypt. Alexander consulted that oracle following his conquest of Egypt. And come back to the Delphic sibyl in a little minute. The Cumerian sibyl here, this one. She was known as Carmentis, and she was a prophetic priestess at the Apollonian oracle at Cumae in Italy. Then there is Erythraean over here, located in Erythrae, a town in Ionia. She predicted the Trojan War. And the Tiburtine sibyl, who was situated in the ancient town of Tibur, and she allegedly prophesied the advent of a final emperor named Constans. And of course, Constantine was the final emperor, as well as a birth of Christ to the classical world. So she foretold those things. That's why we got that little image up there. And she foretold of a sun god destined to eclipse the lunar goddesses, which symbolise what many feel patriarchy usurping matriarchy. So this happy-looking chap is Diodorus Siculus, and he describes not only how the oracle once was, but he describes the hallucinogenic properties of the site and the reasons why he thought the oracle's power and prestige later went into decline. He says there's a chasm at this place where now is situated what is known as the Forbidden Sanctuary. And as goats had been wont to feed about this, because Delphi had not as yet been settled, invariably any goat that approached the chasm and peered into it would leap about in extraordinary fashion and utter a sound quite different from what was formerly wont to emit. The herdsman in charge of the goats marvelled at the strange phenomenon, and having approached the chasm and peeped down to discover what it was, had the same experience as a goat. So the goats began to act being possessed, and the goat herd also began to tell future events. After the people in the area were foretold about the experiences of those who approached the chasm, an increasing number of persons visited the place, and they all tested it because of its miraculous character. and whoever approached the spot became inspired. So for these reasons, the oracle came to be regarded as a marvel. For some time, all who wished to obtain a prophecy approached the chasm, and they made their prophetic replies to one another. But later, since many were leaping down into the chasm, under the influence of their frenzy, and they all disappeared, it seemed best to the dwellers in that area, in that region, to eliminate any risk, to station one woman there as a single prophetess and have the oracles told through her. And as I said before, there's the contraption which she may have sat on, and there may have been underground fissures that she hailed from. But that was a rabbit hole that I had to come back out of. So she could safely mount this, apparently, and then become inspired and give prophecies to those who desired. She was a legendary figure who gave prophecies in the sacred precinct at Delphi. It wasn't the same as the later Pythia, the priestess of Apollo. She was known as the Oracle of Delphi. The Delphic Sibyl was earlier, and she's estimated to have been active about the 11th century BC. Pausanias, quite a good source to look at for history. Writing in the 2nd century AD, he mentions the Delphic Sibyl in his description of local traditions, and dates her activity back to the 11th century BC. The other one appears to have been active around the 8th century BC. So anyway, the legend though is a bit different. The legend says that one day Zeus, Lord of Olympus, the king of all the gods, sent a pair of eagles in different directions. They took off with great haste. One flew west, one flew east, and they met at Delphi, and thus determined the geographical centre of the earth. Now, according to myth, Earth's centre, its navel, was then marked by this conical omphalos stone. There we go. That's it in the museum at Delphi. So, according to the mythology, Apollo vowed to fulfill the prophecy, the promise that he would prophesy to men the will of Zeus. So he set off on this quest, and he stopped at various places en route until at last he found Delphi, a perfect place. And in accordance with his birth promise, he set up a temple, and he later housed there an oracle who would voice predictions. So Apollo finally arrives in Delphi. He encounters Dracana, a child of Gaia, described as a murderous she-snake, corresponding to the Delphic monster Python. Apollo had to slay Dracana, guardian of the sacred spring, before he could claim Delphi as his special sacred place. I'm thinking perhaps Dracana was an early sibling priestess or something like that, but I don't know. But she was overthrown at Delphi anyway, or this horrible she-snake was. The new oracle, and by the way, this is the temple of Apollo at Delphi, and this is a statue of Apollo. According to Diodorus, she was originally chosen from among the young maidens of the vicinity because she served the god. She had to be without physical defect and a virgin. But this soon changed because Diodorus explains that a Thessalian named Echecrates was so smitten by the priestess that he kidnapped her and he raped her. He goes on, and the Delphians, because of this deplorable occurrence, passed a law that in future a virgin should no longer prophesy, but that an elderly woman of 50, thanks very much, an elderly woman of 50 should declare the oracles and that she should be dressed in the costume of a virgin as a reminder of the prophetess of olden times. I don't think I could get into anything I wore when I was that age. She was normally over 50. She was normally unmarried and celibate. But if she did have a husband, they lived separately. She dressed in maiden's clothes, and I showed you the tripod in the temple that she's supposed to have prophesied from. A very important inscription exists, which I'm afraid I could not find a picture of anywhere, but it does exist. It's a 3rd century AD inscription, and it's from a block built into a Byzantine church. And it tells of Theonike, who defines herself as the granddaughter of another Theonike, Pythia of the gods. And that's extremely important that that exists, because it reaffirms that the Pythia was functioning during the Roman Empire, and it also provides the evidence that the oracles at Delphi could have families. So it is an important one. Her counsel was sought by important people throughout the Greek world, but it was most in demand when it came to forecasting the outcome of wars or political actions. As the reputation for accuracy grew, the number of days that the oracle delivered a prophecy became more frequent and highly sought after. She became internationally famous. People came from all over to see her, and she was held in really high regard, extraordinary esteem by the rich and powerful, and the common people as well, kings and commoners who sought her consultation. They believed strongly in the validity and the accuracy of her ability to predict the future. So she was in high demand. She's probably the equivalent to the Pope at that time. You know, there wasn't a Pope. She was like a supreme religious figure at that time. But not every priestess of Apollo was trustworthy, because Herodotus tells us that a priestess called Periala took a bribe from Kobos, who paid her to state that Demaratos was not the true son of the king, King Ariston, and thus not fit to be king. And as punishment, Kobos was banished from Delphi, and Periala was dismissed from her role as the oracle. Now, I kind of touched on it before, but psychedelics it's likely that the oracle did use some kind of psychedelic method to utter her predictions. I mean, she went into a frenzy and started uttering predictions when she inhaled something. So obviously there's some kind of hallucinogenic type of thing that she was inhaling. Underground fissures were found, and they leaked ethylene, and that was put forward as a probable cause of the oracle's frenzied trance. Strabo stated that the seat of the oracle is a cavern hollowed down in the depths, from which arises pneuma that inspires a divine state of possession. Now, it's also suggested that she chewed laurel leaves, and more recent studies have suggested that it wasn't like a laurel leaves, which you might find in the kitchen. It's oleander. So if you try and chew the laurel leaves, you probably just get a horrible taste in your mouth, and tell me if it's psychoactive or wouldn't. Furthermore, it's likely that it wasn't ethylene, but some other gas being inhaled. There are other gases that she could have inhaled. Probably the most famous story is from in 546 BC. King Croesus of Lydia. He wants to know how he's going to fare against Cyrus. There's Croesus, there's Cyrus. Cyrus is king of the Medes and the Persians. and he sends messengers to 7 oracles to test them. And he wants them to tell him what he's going to be doing on a certain day. And on that day, he chops up a tortoise and a lamb and boils them in a cauldron, as you do. The priestess at Delphi is the only one who gets the correct answer, and Croesus is he's convinced of her divine inspiration. He then puts forward his real question. He wants to know what will happen if he goes ahead with war. The answer is that if he marches against Cyrus, he will destroy an empire. He attacks, he's defeated, and the empire that's destroyed is his own. In 54 AD, Nero visits the oracle. He's just been made emperor. He's just murdered his mother. Now the oracle is furious, and she shouts out at him, "Your presence here outrages the god you seek. Go back, matricide." His response? Nero burns the oracle alive inside her inner sanctum, and then he has the hands and feet of her priests and priestesses severed from their bodies, and he burns them too. And finally, he takes 500 bronze, silver, and gold statues within the sacred temple. But the oracle did continue with rituals and ceremonies well into the 3rd century. And then at that point, Christians started persecuting. So it might just be the odd derogatory remark. And then Origen then condemned the oracle as demonic. 385, Theodosius banned all pagan cults, closed all the pagan temples, and the Delphic sanctuary was demolished. All her treasures were stolen. The cracks from when she had inhaled vapours from were dry. Humane Sibyl. When the Delphic oracle spoke, it was to be understood that it was actually Apollo speaking through her. And the oracle was seen as like a trance medium, possessed by God, speaking in tongues. In contrast, Virgil paints quite a different picture of the Humane Sibyl. When she says, "I see wars, dreadful wars, and the Tiber is blood frothing," it's the Sibyl herself who is speaking. And she's inspired by Apollo, but she's not possessed by him. She's now a mental or psychic medium. Another change in belief is that although Apollo grants the gift of prophecy, the ultimate source of the revelation is Jupiter. He's the Roman Zeus, the Roman counterpart to Zeus, the king of the gods. Now his sanctuary shrine was first dedicated to the Earth Mother, and it was eventually associated with Hera, that's Zeus's wife. She was known originally as Ge or Gaia. The legend of Dodona tells of 2 Theban, that's Thebes in Egypt, not Thebes in Greece, 2 Theban priestesses. They were kidnapped and turned themselves into doves to escape. One flew to the Mediterranean coast of Africa, the other travelled to Dodona, landing on an oak tree. The priestess was also followed by a flock of doves. When the wind stirred the leaves of the oak trees, the rustling was recognised by the doves as a projection of Zeus's voice. Their repetitive cooing was their only way to communicate his message. The cooing needed further decoding, and this was where the priestess stepped in. Herodotus, though, he's another historian, he believed that the sound of the cooing was simply a metaphor for the speech of the priestesses. He said that the people of Dodona thought the language of the foreign women was like the twittering of birds. So remember I said about, dreadlocks, they might think snakes, a different language that they'd never heard before sounded like birds. There's lots of examples like that. The other one that I can think of in Greece was when the Magi came. Magi is a Greek word, magic, that's where we get the word magic from. And this was what they called the Persian priests, because they didn't understand what they were doing. It was magic. So these are the sort of things that can be misunderstood. Herodotus, yeah, I've said that. Okay, Walter Burke observes that Odysseus went to Dodona in order to learn the plans of Zeus from the oak of mighty foliage. So it's likely, therefore, that it was the rustling of leaves which relayed the word of Zeus to the many pilgrims who visited the oracle at Dodona. In fact, it's thought that it was actually the most widely practiced and accepted practice, and it's chronicled with the greatest frequency out of all of them. Sibylline oracles. These were not the Sibylline books. The Sibylline oracles were compiled between the 2nd century BC and the 7th century CE, or BC and AD. The collection consists of 14 oracles and several fragments. It's written by Jewish and Christian authors. Some older prophetic utterances are also included. Early Christians believed that the Holy Spirit inspired some of the Sibylline oracles and, as I've mentioned, foretold the coming of Christ. Sibylline oracles contain accurate global predictions, apparently, that chronicle the rise and fall of great empires and the destinies and fate of important heads of state, village kingdoms, their leaders and their nations. That's all according to Mama Zogby. I would encourage you to do your own research on that. So today you can listen to them on YouTube and decide for yourself. You'll immediately hear the similarities to the Bible. In fact, the first book is the Book of Noah. Other argument here is that the sibyls learned the Jewish history from Jewish traders and wrote it down to eventually be included in the Bible. So these oracles, they're studied by scholars, they can be found in university libraries and archives. Plenty of copies, 83p on Amazon, or as I say, you can listen to it on YouTube if you get 4.5 hours. One famous soothsayer. Does anyone know who this is and what he said? No, okay. It's probably more famous for his prediction than for his name, which, let's be honest, sounds like a cat food. So, Spurina was the soothsayer who predicted danger to Julius Caesar. Beware the Ides of March. It's the 15th of the month, and this was in 44 AD. So the evening before, Julius and his wife had terrible dreams. It was an important meeting of the Senate, and it was to be held the following day. As Caesar entered the building, he laughed in the direction of Spurina and told him, "The Ides of March have come," to which the soothsayer responded that they had come but not gone. And then Julius took his seat, conspirators gathered around him, and sadly stabbed him to death. And Sperina's prediction had come true. Now, predicting in the form of soothsaying and dreams and omens and inspecting animal entrails, that did still carry on, but people became more interested in astrology. The origins of astrology, I've mentioned the Magi, linked to Persian and Mesopotamian cultures, while the Magi are often associated with the biblical cultures, the biblical story of the three wise men, and their history stretches back into ancient Persia. And they were, as I said to you before, the priestly caste, known for their expertise in astrology, divination, and dream interpretation. So, another thing is the planets, our word meaning wanderer, they were all given Roman god names like Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, and so on. And as we probably all know, based on the position of the planets at our birth, it's thought our character and destiny can be determined. Comets, though, they were thought to be another omen of special events. One appeared just after Julius Caesar's death, and it was thought by people to be a spirit ascending to heaven. So, that is, before you clap, that is the end of my talk, but you probably noticed that we have some special guests in today. Because I was talking about snakes, I cannot believe I managed to pull this off. Because about a month ago, I asked my friend if her daughter could bring along a python. Because as I was writing this, I thought, that'd be cool. Wouldn't that be cool if I got in a python? And she said that, she was okay about that, but she has her own business and she does piercings and she's fully booked today. And me and my friend on Thursday afternoon, we went through Facebook, reptiles and snakes and things like that, and then I saw this River Rescue's animal sanctuary, and I thought, well, if you don't ask, you don't get. And 5 minutes later, AJ agreed to come to today with some snakes which you can talk to or handle if you want to. Can I ask AJ, are you about?
Yeah,
Do you want to come up? Now, AJ has got a beautiful ivory. It's okay, just if you want to exit, you can. What am I doing? Okay, so he's an Ivory Burmese Python. And what age is it?
This is only 3 years old. It's the third largest species of snake in the world. So this will be up to 15 to 20 foot long one day.
Wow. So he is he's even as a baby.
So yeah, we actually just rescued this one only a couple of weeks ago. One of our newer rescues was living in an enclosure with absolutely nothing other than pee and poo, unfortunately. So thankfully now we've got him, and he's doing a lot better now.
That's great. It really is. It's marvellous that you're rescuing, snakes and other animals as well. But I think a lot of these snakes, people don't know how to handle them, and it gets out of control for them, and then they have to give them up. But if there's anybody in today, that is interested in river rescues or adopting a snake, then AJ is just over there. Can I have a look at this? Is Malfoy. His name is Malfoy. And I'm going to have a little cuddle. So. What am I doing? See what I do for you people. Up here. just don't get too adventurous. Too adventurous. But here's lovely. They don't, they're cold to touch, but they don't, what is that? Do they smell fear? Hi. Getting a bit fresh. Hey, where is it going? Awesome. Thank you.
We're round of applause for her, eh?
That actually was you. Very pleasant. you feel the strength as well. You really do feel the strength in our muscles. And but cold to touch, but not moist at all. Quite dry actually. Silky smooth. So you want to go and have a cuddle with Malfoy, who's just over there, is a very nice snake. Not at all vicious.
I have a pet snake as well. He's called Bob, and he's a corn snake. He's absolutely tiny compared to Malfoy. But just when he wraps himself around or around your hand or something, the strength in him is tiny. Is absolutely phenomenal. So the strength of him is absolutely amazing. We've got our next talk coming up in about 5 minutes. Whilst you're waiting for that, just to remind you again, there are plenty of books for sale. There's the raffle for sale as well. We also have books from Stephen Bird, who is SPI's resident psychic medium. That's at the back of the hall, along with all the others. That details the psychic journey, lots of scary stuff in there. And of course, one book that's for sale as well is Alyson's book as well, and that's in the top right-hand corner. So if we could just thank Alyson, and we'll reconvene in 5 minutes.